What we've got today is a Henry rifle. And for something that's 155 years old, we know that by the serial number, it's in amazingly good shape. It's quite an attractive rifle to my eye. This brass frame has a nice mustard yellow patina, as does the butt plate. There's practically no corrosion at all on the rifle, on the ferrous metal parts. Still works, still functions. If we had the correct ammunition, we could shoot this sucker. So it's kind of interesting. On the off side, somebody personalized this one with either maybe silver, although it's not really tarnished, so it may be German silver or some other alloy. But put that star on the butt, and you'll note that it has a sling swivel here and an attachment here for a sling. Now, the Henry rifle was never officially adopted by the United States military, but these are military characteristics. This was developed or invented by Benjamin Tyler Henry, and the first production was in 1860. So while, again, it was not ever purchased by the United States Ordnance Department, individual regiments in the Civil War occasionally equipped their soldiers with these rifles. Individual soldiers may have also purchased them. So it's really neat, and it is one of the first really successful lever-action firearms. It was preceded by a firearm called the Volcanic. But that was a very weak cartridge because the propellant was limited because it was in the actual base of the bullet. So with a heavy bullet and a light charge of powder, not very efficient. The Henry rifle held 16 rounds in the magazine tube, and if you had one in the chamber, you had a 17-shot rifle. A great advantage in any situation requiring self-defense. So it's interesting. This is loaded by pushing this follower up to this point and then turning this sleeve. And I'm not going to do that because there's some jamming of that spring and I don't want to abuse it. But this section would turn, and then you could drop the cartridges down into the magazine tube. And you'll note that on this rifle, the magazine tube is milled or forged as an integral part of the barrel. Now, there are a couple of disadvantages to this method of using a magazine. One was that because this entire open area here, it was easy to get dirt or gradu of some kind in that would interfere with the functioning of that spring. The other downside was that as you were shooting this rifle and gripping it here, if that follower came down and hit your hand, that would stop the feeding of the cartridges into the chamber. The other downside is that black powder burned very, very hot. So if you put 16 rounds through this in a hurry, this whole barrel and that magazine tube would get pretty hot. So you needed perhaps a glove on this hand to be really efficient with it. The 1866 Winchester, which was the first lever-action firearm to bear the Winchester name, solved those problems. Number one, they put a solid magazine tube that was separate from the barrel on that 1866, and they introduced a loading gate in this area, so you loaded it from here, which was much more convenient and much more a contained system. They also put a wooden forend on it, so you didn't have to worry about the barrel getting hot. If you saw The Ballad of Buster Scruggs by the Coen brothers, the one episode where the young woman is on her way to Oregon Territory, in the battle scene with the Native Americans, the wagon master uses a Henry rifle. So were these around in Wyoming back in the day? Well, we have pretty solid evidence that they were. A little bit of a backstory. In 1866, a guy named a Colonel, Henry Carrington, was tasked by his superior officer, William T. Sherman of Civil War fame, to go into the Powder River country and establish 3 forts to protect travelers on the Bozeman Trail. So there was already a Fort Reno, so Carrington was charged with resupplying that fort, possibly relocating it, and to develop 2 other forts in the Powder River Basin, one in present-day Wyoming and one in present-day Montana. And while we're looking for this stuff and history on this rifle, I wanted to make sure that I had the territory correct at the time of this establishment of Fort Phil Kearny. So I found this interesting bit of Wyoming trivia. Because of Wyoming's location as part of the Louisiana Purchase, the Oregon Country, and the Mexican Cession, the land which became Wyoming has a complicated history of territorial relationships. Portions of the territory, which eventually fell under Wyoming's jurisdiction, were at various points associated with the territories of Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Dakota, Nebraska, and Utah, and had previously belonged to the independent states of Great Britain, France, Spain, Mexico, and Texas. So, okay, Carrington left Fort Kearny, different than Fort Phil Kearny. Fort Kearny was in Nebraska. He left there in May of 1866 en route to the Powder River Basin to establish these forts. Between August 1st of 1866 and December 31st of 1866, 96 soldiers and 58 civilians were killed in the vicinity of Fort Phil Kearny. And that includes what has come to be known as the Fetterman Fight. On December 31st, 1866, Captain Fetterman and Lieutenant Grummond, with 78 soldiers and 2 civilians, were dispatched from the fort by Carrington to relieve the wood train. Carrington sited the fort in an open area on the plains for defense, which meant that in order to get wood for heating and cooking and construction at the fort, they had to go to the forested area and bring that wood back into the fort. And it was fairly common for the Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, Northern Arapaho warriors in that area to attack that wood train. So again, December 21st, 1866, the wood train was under attack. Carrington dispatched Fetterman and Grummond and their detachments to relieve the wood train. By the time they got outside the fort, the signals from the wood train indicated that it was no longer under attack. So, for reasons that remain unknown, Fetterman decided to disobey Carrington's order to not cross Lodge Trail Ridge. But he diverted from the wood train and was taunted by a group of Native American warriors that included the later to become legendary Crazy Horse, taunting the soldiers. So we don't know why or exactly what happened, but the soldiers were lured over Lodge Trail Ridge, and all 81 of them were killed in that encounter. The 2 civilians that went with the detachment were Isaac Fisher and James Wheatley. They were anxious to go on this expedition because they had brand new Henry rifles and they wanted to try them out. Well, they certainly got that opportunity. Again, 81 soldiers and civilians total killed. And what we have here is an interesting artifact. This is a .44 Henry rimfire cartridge case. In the course of the Fetterman fight, the 2 civilians made their last stand in a group of rocks. And several of these cartridge cases were picked up at that location. So again, it's somewhat unique to know that this particular cartridge case was in that location and fired by one of those 2 individuals. Interesting part of the story. Interesting cartridge case, an interesting story on the Henry rifle. They certainly got to try it out. Okay, that's the Henry rifle. I hope you enjoyed this, and thank you for watching. If you want to make any comments, there's a space below here to do that, or you can give us a call at the museum. We'd be glad to chat with you about this or any other firearm of interest to you. Thank you.